Question 9, 10 and 11, I understand are grouped.
They're quite right. The events are in the past, but they're still current as the inquiries are underway in depth report.
Moved on.
I propose to take questions 9 to 11 together. The committee last met on the 8th of February this year. The meeting was attended by ministers and senior officials from the Department of Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform, Foreign Affairs and Trade, Justice and Equality, Health, Communications, Climate Action, Environment, Transport, Tourism and Sport, Housing, Planning and Local Government and Defence. Arrangements are being made for the next meeting of Cabinet Committee F, but a date is not yet finalised. The role of the Cabinet Committee is to keep the state systems for the analysis of, preparation for and response to threats to national security under review, and to provide high-level coordination between relevant departments and agencies on related matters. Given the recent publication of the O'Toole report on the reform of the Gardaí, we intend to have a meeting of this Cabinet Subcommittee and the Justice Subcommittee to examine the Government's response.
Supplementary says table. Deputy Joan Burton.
First of all, if I could just say that the committee met last February, if I heard you correctly, Taoiseach. Yeah. With all of the difficulties besetting the Guards and with very important issues of national security and indeed relating to Brexit, I just find that very unusual that what's a very important committee would meet so infrequently, and also bearing in mind that we had changes of Garda commissioners and changes of other changes within the Gardaí. In any event, I want to ask you about the long-standing discussion about how national security is addressed. And the report on the future of policing has recommended the immediate creation of a national centre for intelligence collation and analysis, the Strategic Threat Analysis Centre, STAG, situated centrally within government, that should be headed by a national security coordinator. That would be a new post. Who would answer directly to the Taoiseach. Taoiseach, do you agree with this recommendation, and will you implement it? They also recommended the updating of our capacity to cope with cyber security strategy, which, as we know, particularly from events in the UK, is extremely important. And the National Cyber Security Centre proposal that should answer to the National Security Coordinator and therefore indirectly to yourself. The role of the Navy in the Mediterranean. I'm sure you're aware that the ship that Médecins Sans Frontières has been using to save lives, the Aquarius, has been deflagged by Panama. Has the Irish government considered offering to register that ship so it can continue to save lives? And I understand the responsible line minister is your colleague, Minister Shane Ross. Will you ask him to do that? Because MSF carry out really important life-saving work in the Med.
Next is table Deputy McDonald.
And I'm delighted, Taoiseach, that you raised with President Abbas issues around women's rights and LGBT rights, and no doubt in giving him the benefit of your wisdom, you would also have reflected that yourself and your colleagues are relatively recent converts to those causes yourselves, so I'm sure you can assist him in walking that journey. I want to welcome the publication of the Commission on the Future of Policing. I want to thank Kathleen O'Toole and the Commission for their considerable work. It is undoubtedly a very significant and detailed piece of work, and it has very many positive recommendations in respect of modernising policing. I like and I want to commend the very strong emphasis on community policing and policing within the community. I think that's important. The emphasis on human rights, on tackling cybercrime, on providing quality training for Gardaí, as well as an access programme. All of these are welcome. But there are some areas in which we will need further clarification and that I think we need to pause to consider. We have concern around the proposal to abolish the policing authority and to reassign some of its functions, for example with regard to appointments to a new statutory Garda board and the Garda Commissioner. I think, Taoiseach, it's not insignificant that there were differing views on that point within the Commission itself, and I note the minority view of Vicky Conway and Eddie Malloy contained in the report in that regard. We, for our part in Sinn Féin, had sought more power for the policing authority, including in relation to appointments, because the policing authority was making progress and was advancing. An independent appointments process is essential, and transparency has to be kept front and centre. It's our view that the current process is the best way of doing business, and the removal of such powers from the authority is in fact a regressive step. So can you tell us, Taoiseach, if the Government has considered the report? When will we have a debate? What's the current state of play? And what sense, can we have some sense of the next steps in the process?
Thank you. I'll ask John Corla. In the context of the National Security Committee and its work, I think the report led by Kathleen O'Toole is a very important piece of work, comprehensive, and deals in a fundamental way with many of the issues that require reform in relation to security and in relation to An Garda Síochána. And I do believe and would support its, for example, its emphasis, and something with much of the recommendations tally actually with a lot of what Fianna Fáil put into its own submission to the review. We had called for this review originally. I think we were the first party to call for a fundamental patent-style review of An Garda Síochána, and we welcome it. Cyber security is where we are weak as a country. We are very weak on this. It's a vulnerability, and I know, Taoiseach, that countries are telling you this, that Ireland is vulnerable in terms of cyber security to attack. We need more specialisms, and we need faster routes to recruit specialists into An Garda Síochána in terms of areas like cyber security and other fields as well. I think there are issues around the policing authority and the inspectorate. I think I can recall someone articulating at one stage there was about 5 different bodies that a Garda Commissioner had to go to, including an Oireachtas committee. And there are question marks about that. And I think simplifying that and streamlining that is important. I also believe I believe in a strong policing authority, but there has to be clear delineation of roles. I think the operational responsibility has to be with the Garda Commissioner and his team. I don't think a sort of policing authority that is just about public commentary is not what I envisaged a policing authority to be about in itself. You know, that every time an incident breaks up, I don't like to look at that, I don't like to sound. That to me isn't really where an authority should be. And I would accept, and I would look at the minority report, and I would accept there's a debate there to be had. In terms of GSOC, for example, I don't think GSOC has worked out. You have guards investigating guards. You have too much minor issues getting into GSOC. There are guards now being sent to investigate every kind of a complaint. Whereas one would have thought their primary responsibility should be to continue to do their job. I thought about a higher management rank now in certain parts of the country. So the whole industry, and then unfortunately, the sense of satisfaction emanating out of GSOC inquiries to the public doesn't seem to be high. I base this on the people who have come to us looking for inquiries and so on. I actually find it difficult to recommend to people that they should pursue an issue with GSOC. I'm talking about serious issues now. Why am I reluctant? Because I think it could actually continue the trauma for the individual without any definitive sense of there being closure at the end of the GSOC process. It's far too long. Oh my God. It's far too long altogether. And so I think there has to be a radical look at GSOC, and I think its operation should be on the bigger issues, if you like, more serious complaints, as opposed to ones that should be primarily dealt with by the internal governance within An Garda Síochána itself. And that hasn't worked in practice in the last while.
Taoiseach to respond.
Yeah, just say that the Cabinet Committee F is a new Cabinet Committee, one that I set up myself to deal with national security issues, and it's not designed to meet on a regular basis, designed to meet on an ad hoc basis as needed. There's a separate Cabinet Committee that deals with public sector reform, including reform of justice. My practice, as I've explained to the House in the past, is to deal with more issues as a cabinet as a whole, and I believe in collective cabinet responsibility, and where important things need to be discussed, like Brexit, for example, I prefer to have them discussed by the whole cabinet rather than a subcommittee of the cabinet. And sometimes that takes more time. It's why we often have to have 2 meetings in the 1 week. Our meetings take longer than they did in the past. But as much as possible, if something is of great importance, I would prefer to have it discussed by the cabinet as a whole rather than a subcommittee. And I appreciate you need different types of government and different styles of government for different times. But I certainly felt in the last government a lot of things were decided by the party leaders or decided by the MC. And then rubber stamped by Cabinet, and I've tried to adopt a different approach involving the Cabinet more collectively in making decisions. So, for example, the O'Toole report was discussed at the full Cabinet. They got it first, got to see it, and we got to discuss it as a whole, rather than sending it to a Cabinet subcommittee, who would then just refer it on for a short discussion by the full Cabinet. And the same thing applies for the appointment of the Garda Commissioner. That went straight to the full Cabinet. Rather than to a Cabinet subcommittee. In terms of the Commission on the Reform of Policing, I just wanted to put on the record my profound thanks to Kathleen O'Toole and her team for the really good work they've done over the past few months in producing this report and producing it on time and giving us what I think can inform a roadmap for the reform of our police service between now and 2022. And the Commission identifies that date themselves as the centenary of the creation of An Garda Síochána, and suggests that we set that date as our target date for having introduced a reformed policing service in Ireland. And I think among the things that are particularly appealing to me in the report is the acknowledgement that policing is about more than the Gardaí, that we need to have more of what we saw yesterday, for example, a joint approach between the Gardaí and social services when it comes to responding to crime, preventing recidivism. And also I think some of the proposals in relation to GSOC, and I'd agree with Deputy Martin on this, do seem to make sense to me, to move GSOC from being what it is now into an independent office of the Police Ombudsman, to use their permanent staff more and second the Gardaí a little bit less, and to have minor complaints dealt with at Garda level rather than at the level of the Ombudsman. I think it was right to set up GSOC, but I think it needs to be strengthened and modernised. And also the report provides for the Garda Commissioner to be allowed to do his or her job, and I think that's important too. It is, the current accountability arrangements are quite strange, where you have a Garda Inspector, a Garda Authority, GSOC, and then of course regular requests to come before at least 2 committees, the House Justice and PAC. You always have to get the balance right, I think, between allowing people to do their job and be accountable for doing their job. And if you spend almost all your time accounting, it can be quite hard to actually have the time to execute the job. And the suggestions they make, I think, might be a step in the right direction for the Garda Commissioner in that regard. The Government at Cabinet considered the report and noted it, and provided for its publication. And we've committed now to study it, to respond to it, and to develop a reasoned response and a timelined action and implementation plan before the end of the year. So the next step is to do that. Minister for Justice will develop a reasoned response to the report, to each of the recommendations, and then a timelined action and implementation plan. That'll go to Cabinet. That'll go to Cabinet subcommittee, and that'll go to Cabinet subcommittee. And then to Cabinet, and I think what will be useful and welcome as well is a discussion in the House on the report. I think it's a very good report, and I don't want any of my comments, by the way, to be misconstrued as the government not accepting the report or not accepting the vast majority of the report. But I think it does make good sense. There are particular recommendations. 1 or 2 of which are controversial, and has been noted, and has been noted as well that there is a disagreement on it. No, we haven't made any decisions in principle. What we've said we'd do is note the report, publish it, and now we'll develop a reasoned response to it, and an implementation plan, an action plan to be prepared before the end of the year.